So there I was, Marcus Webb, standing in front of what looked like a crystal cathedral designed by someone who'd clearly never heard of right angles, the Galactic Institute for Psychic Sciences. Yeah, that's a real place. And no, before you ask, I didn't get in because I'm some kind of mental wizard. I got in because apparently the Galactic Education Exchange Program has a diversity quota, and humans check the box for adorably primitive species that might accidentally learn something. The acceptance letter had been pretty clear about my status here. Quote, while humans lack any measurable psychic ability, their unique neural architecture may provide valuable insights into non-telepathic consciousness. End quote. In other words, I was basically a lab rat with a student ID. My dorm room was on the 7th floor of something called the Mindspire Tower, which sounds way cooler than it actually was. Think less mystical wizard tower and more brutalist apartment complex with too many glowing crystals. The elevator didn't have buttons. It just sort of knew where you wanted to go. Which was great until you realized it was reading your mind, and suddenly you're stopping at every floor because you can't help thinking about all the floors you don't want to visit. When I finally made it to my room, my roommate was already there, hunched over what looked like a holographic textbook titled Advanced Emotional Manipulation Through Dream Invasion. Fun light reading. Oh, wonderful, he chittered, without looking up. You must be the human. He had 4 arms, compound eyes, and the general appearance of a praying mantis that had been hitting the gym. His name tag read Crix in about 12 different alien scripts. Guilty as charged, I said, tossing my bags onto what I assumed was my bed. It immediately adjusted to my body temperature and started humming something that might have been a lullaby. You must be my roommate. The one who's going to help me navigate this place without getting my brains scrambled by accident. Crix finally looked up, all 6 eyes focusing on me with what I was learning to recognize as the universal expression for, oh no, this poor stupid creature has no idea what it's gotten itself into. Marcus Webb, he said, reading from his own holographic display. Human, no detectable psychic signature, recommended placement, remedial thought shielding, and basic mental hygiene. He paused. It says here your species processes information through something called linear thinking. How charmingly primitive. Hey, linear thinking got us to space, I pointed out, eventually. Yes, well, Creek's mandibles clicked nervously. Space travel and surviving at the Institute are 2 very different challenges. You see, Marcus Webb, this academy operates on a very specific social hierarchy. At the top are the mind hunters, telepathic predators who can strip your consciousness bare and leave you whimpering in a corner. Below them are the dream weavers, who can trap you in nightmares so realistic you'll never be sure what's real again. Then come the emotion feeders, who survive by consuming your happiness until you forget what joy feels like. Sounds like high school with extra steps, I muttered. Crix continued as if I hadn't spoken. And at the very bottom, sadly, are species like humans, the psychically deaf, the mentally defenseless. Usually they don't last more than a week before requesting transfer to a nice safe engineering program. I unpacked my laptop and plugged it into what I hoped was a power adapter and not some kind of alien brain scanner. Well, that's encouraging. Any other cheerful warnings you'd like to share? Just one, Crix said, his voice dropping to what I assumed was his version of a whisper. Whatever you do, avoid Vorthak the Mind Hunter. He's a Zephyrian death lizard with psychic abilities that make professors nervous. Last week he made a crystalline honor student relive their most embarrassing childhood memory on loop for 6 hours. Just for fun. Sounds like a real charmer, I said. Let me guess, he's going to take one look at the helpless human and decide I'm perfect practice material. Almost certainly, Crix agreed. I'd start practicing your transfer application now if I were you. I grinned and opened my laptop to the familiar blue glow of Earth's internet, somehow still accessible through subspace relays that I definitely didn't understand. Thanks for the heads up, Crix, but I think you might be underestimating humans just a little bit. I certainly hope so, he chittered. For your sake. My first class was Introduction to Defensive Mental Architecture, which sounded about as exciting as it was. Picture a lecture hall filled with floating crystals, bioluminescent fungi that took notes, and what appeared to be a sentient cloud of gas wearing a tiny graduation cap. And then there was me, the only creature in the room that needed to actually sit in a chair. Professor Mindak, a being that looked like a cross between an octopus and a philosophy textbook, was droning on about psychic firewalls, when the temperature in the room suddenly dropped about 10 degrees. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the fungus stopped glowing. That's when I met Vorthak the Mind Hunter. Picture a velociraptor that hit the gym religiously for about 50 years, then got a degree in psychological warfare, 7 feet of scaled muscle, with eyes like molten gold and teeth that belonged in a horror movie. He didn't walk into the classroom so much as he stalked into it, like he owned not just the room but everyone's thoughts inside it. Well, Vorthak said, his voice carrying the kind of casual menace that suggested he practiced it in the mirror. What do we have here? His gaze swept across the room before landing on me like a targeting laser. A human. How quaint. Professor Mindak's tentacles twitched nervously. Vorthak, perhaps you could find your seat, so we can continue with the lesson on... Oh, I think this is the lesson, Professor, Vorthak interrupted, never taking his eyes off me. Class, observe. A creature so psychically primitive that it probably doesn't even know I'm currently reading its surface thoughts. Here's the thing about being the only psychically deaf person in a room full of telepaths. You get really good at reading body language, and every piece of alien body language in that room was screaming, "Oh crap, someone's about to get mentally destroyed." Vorthak began to circle my desk like a shark. Let's see what passes for consciousness in this adorable little mammal, shall we? I could feel him probing at the edges of my mind, like someone trying to pick a lock. The other students leaned forward in anticipation. This was apparently better than cable. Fascinating, Vorthak purred. Such simple neural pathways. Such basic emotional responses. Tell me, little human, what's your greatest fear, your most shameful memory, your deepest regret? I pulled out a bag of Cheetos I'd brought from Earth and started munching. Well, right now, I'm mostly worried about whether the cafeteria food is going to be edible. Also, I'm kind of regretting not bringing more snacks. A ripple of confusion went through the room. This was apparently not how these encounters usually went. Vorthak's golden eyes narrowed. You misunderstand the situation, Primitive. I am Vorthak the Mind Hunter. I have reduced trained telepaths to gibbering wrecks. I once made a hive mind queen question her own existence. I am the apex predator of consciousness itself. That's nice, I said, offering him the bag. Want a Cheeto? They're the crunchy kind. I am going to peel back the layers of your pathetic mind like an onion, Vorthak hissed. I will expose every weakness, every fear, every moment of shame you've ever experienced, and when I'm done, you'll beg me for the mercy of unconsciousness. Okay, I said, but fair warning, it gets pretty weird in there. I had a lot of unsupervised internet access as a kid. Vorthak smiled, showing way too many teeth. Oh, I do so love a challenge, class. Witness the systematic destruction of human consciousness. This is what happens when you dare to exist in a universe designed for your betters. He placed one clawed hand on my forehead, and I felt the full weight of his psychic presence slam into my mind like a freight train made of pure, malevolent intent. Now, he whispered, let's see what horrors lurk in the primitive human psyche. That's when things got interesting. So here's what Vorthak was expecting to find when he broke into my mind. Fear, maybe some repressed childhood trauma, probably a few embarrassing memories from middle school that he could use to turn me into a sobbing mess. Standard human psychological architecture, right? What he actually found was the mental equivalent of opening what you think is a closet and discovering it's actually a portal to a dimension where physics go to die. The first thing that hit him was a full-volume mental replay of the Macarena. Not just the song, mind you, but the complete dance routine as performed by my 7th grade PE class, burned into my memory with the intensity of a religious experience. Vorthak's confident psychic probe suddenly felt like it was tap dancing through a minefield of second-hand embarrassment. What is this? He muttered, his golden eyes starting to twitch. But that was just the surface level. Human consciousness, as it turns out, is not the neat, organized filing cabinet that most telepathic species maintain. It's more like that junk drawer in your kitchen where you keep rubber bands, expired coupons, and that weird key that doesn't fit any lock you own except the drawer is infinitely deep and occasionally catches fire. Vorthak pushed deeper, trying to find something he could work with. Instead, he stumbled into my childhood cartoon memories, specifically that episode of Tom and Jerry where Tom gets split into multiple versions of himself. Except my brain had somehow cross-referenced it with that time I watched a documentary about quantum physics, creating a weird mental mashup where cartoon violence was being explained by Neil deGrasse Tyson. This makes no sense, Vorthak growled, his claws digging into my desk. Human thoughts are supposed to be linear, sequential, logical. That's when he hit my grocery list from last Tuesday, which my brain had helpfully filed right next to my existential crisis about whether hot dogs or sandwiches, which was connected to a half-remembered conversation about the heat death of the universe, which somehow looped back to wondering if I'd remembered to lock my car. The other students were starting to look concerned. Vorthak's usual smooth psychological assault had turned into what appeared to be a very confused lizard trying to solve a Rubik's Cube that was also on fire. "Focus," he hissed to himself. "Every mind has a core fear. Every consciousness has a breaking point." So he went looking for my deepest, darkest terrors. What he found instead was my extensive mental catalog of horror movies I'd watched for fun. Aliens, Predator, The Thing, Event Horizon, Dead Space, Silent Hill. Decades of accumulated nightmare fuel that I'd voluntarily subjected myself to because apparently humans think being scared is entertaining. But here's the really messed up part. My brain didn't store these as traumatic memories. They were filed under entertainment, right next to comedy specials and cooking shows. Vorthak found himself trying to use my fear of xenomorphs against me, only to discover that I actually thought the alien design was pretty cool and had considered getting a tattoo of one. You enjoyed this." Vorthak's voice cracked slightly. "This creature that dissolves its victims from the inside. This is pleasurable to you?" "Oh yeah, great movie," I said cheerfully, still eating Cheetos. "Have you seen the director's cut? Really adds to the atmosphere." Vorthak was starting to sweat, which I didn't even know reptiles could do. His psychic probe was getting tangled up in my brain's strange filing system, where traumatic childhood memories were stored right next to funny cat videos, and my deepest philosophical thoughts were somehow connected to song lyrics from the 90s. Then he made his first real mistake. He tried to weaponize my own memories against me, pulling up that time in 4th grade when I wet my pants during a school presentation. Classic psychological warfare, right? Except my brain immediately connected that memory to that episode of Community where Troy and Abed wet their pants on purpose, which reminded me of the time I'd rewatched the entire series during a fever dream, which somehow linked to my theory that all sitcoms exist in the same universe, which spiraled into a comprehensive mental database of continuity errors that I'd cataloged for no apparent reason. Vorthak's probe wasn't just stuck now. It was actively lost, wandering through mental corridors that led to other mental corridors that sometimes just ended in a memory of me wondering what that smell was in the refrigerator 3 months ago. "This is impossible," he snarled, his perfect, predatory composure finally starting to crack. "No mind is this chaotic, this random, this utterly without structure or logic." That's when I decided to be helpful. "Oh, you're having trouble navigating up there? Yeah, sorry about that. I never really learned to organize my thoughts properly. Want me to think about something specific? I've got some really weird dreams, if that helps." The look of dawning horror on Vorthak's face was absolutely priceless. He'd just realized that what he was experiencing wasn't even my subconscious yet. This was just my regular, everyday thinking process. And I'd just offered to show him my dreams. Now if Vorthak had been smart, he would have cut his losses right there. Backed out of my mind, maybe made some excuse about how humans weren't worth his time, preserved what was left of his dignity. But Vorthak the Mindhunter didn't get his reputation by being smart. He got it by being the psychic equivalent of an apex predator. And apex predators don't retreat from prey, especially not prey that's offering to make itself more vulnerable. "Show me," he hissed, pressing deeper into my consciousness. "Show me these dreams, little human. Let me see the true depths of your primitive fears." So I did. The first dream he encountered was one I'd had about 3 weeks ago, where I was being chased through my childhood home by something that looked like a cross between the Terminator and my high school math teacher, Mrs. Peterson. The dream logic was perfect human nonsense. I kept trying to escape by opening doors that led to other parts of the house that definitely hadn't existed in real life, including a basement that was somehow bigger than the entire house above it, and a bathroom that had 17 toilets arranged in a perfect circle, for some reason that made complete sense at the time. Vorthak tried to latch onto the fear element, but here's what he didn't understand about human dreams. We're used to them being absolutely insane. My subconscious had tagged this particular nightmare under Tuesday night entertainment, because the Terminator Mrs. Peterson hybrid had been trying to make me solve calculus problems instead of killing me, which my sleeping brain had found hilarious. This is not fear," Vorthak muttered, his psychic presence starting to feel distinctly wobbly. "This is madness disguised as normalcy." Oh, but we were just getting started. The next dream was my personal favorite. The one where I'm in a zombie apocalypse, but all the zombies are extremely polite. They'd knock on doors before trying to eat your brains, say "excuse me" when they shambled past you in hallways, and always cleaned up after themselves. I'd spent most of the dream having philosophical conversations with a zombie who used to be a philosophy professor, and was very apologetic about the whole brain-eating situation, but explained that it was just his nature now, you understand. Vorthak's probe recoiled like it had been slapped. You're enjoying this. The death, the horror, the complete breakdown of civilization, and you're finding it amusing? Well, yeah, I said, licking Cheeto dust off my fingers. It's a pretty original take on the zombie genre. Usually they're just mindless monsters, you know? But the real kicker was when he stumbled into my recurring nightmare about being late for a final exam in a class I'd never attended, in a building that kept rearranging itself every time I turned a corner. This should have been pure anxiety fuel, except my brain had somehow crossed it with my memories of playing video games. So I kept trying to solve the problem by looking for a save point or checking my inventory for useful items. Vorthak was getting desperate now. He dove deeper, looking for primal human fears. What he found instead was my extensive mental collection of cosmic horror scenarios that I'd absorbed from years of reading Lovecraft and watching sci-fi movies. The thing is, when you voluntarily exposed yourself to every possible way the universe can end, from heat death to false vacuum decay to rogue black holes, your brain starts treating existential dread like a hobby. The stars are going out one by one, he whispered, caught in one of my memories of contemplating the eventual death of the universe. Everything ends in cold and darkness and entropy. Yeah, that one keeps me up sometimes, I admitted. But I figure by the time that happens, we'll either have figured out how to jump to a new universe or we'll all be long dead anyway, so why worry about it? That's when Vorthak made his second big mistake. He tried to find my childhood trauma, the deep psychological wounds that every sentient being carries. What he discovered instead was that humans have this weird ability to process trauma by turning it into jokes. My most embarrassing moments weren't hidden away in some dark corner of my psyche. They were filed under funny stories to tell at parties. The time I accidentally called my teacher Mom in 3rd grade? Comedy gold. The time I walked into a glass door in front of my crush in high school? Hilarious anecdote. The time I got food poisoning from gas station sushi and spent an entire day convinced I was dying? The setup for my best never eat gas station sushi routine. Vorthak's psychic probe was starting to feel less like a surgical instrument and more like a confused tourist who'd gotten lost in a foreign city where all the street signs were written in a language that technically made sense but followed no logical pattern whatsoever. But the absolute breaking point came when he encountered my music library. See, human brains have this delightful feature where songs get stuck in our heads for no reason, and they just loop endlessly until something else displaces them. Vorthak's probe accidentally triggered the mental playback of Baby Shark, which immediately got stuck not just in my head, but in his psychic connection to my head. Do-do-do-do-do-do, I hummed helpfully. Baby Shark. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do. What? What is this auditory torture? Vorthak gasped. Oh, that's just an earworm, I explained. They're really catchy. Don't worry, it only lasts for like 3 hours. Sometimes 4. But my brain was just getting warmed up. The Baby Shark loop triggered a cascade of associated memories. Every annoying commercial jingle I'd ever heard, that one song from a movie soundtrack that I'd listened to 500 times in high school, the complete mental soundtrack to every video game I'd ever played, all jumbled together in a chaotic medley that made perfect sense to me and absolutely no sense to anyone else. Vorthak tried to retreat, but human memory association is like a spiderweb made of silly string and existential questions. Every thought connected to 5 other thoughts, which connected to memories, which connected to half-remembered facts from Wikipedia articles I'd read at 3 in the morning, which somehow looped back to wondering whether aliens had invented their own version of pizza. Make it stop, Vorthak pleaded, his voice cracking. Please, just make it stop. Sorry, dude, I said, genuinely sympathetic. Once you're in there, you kinda have to ride it out. Hey, while you're stuck, wanna see the dream I had about fighting a dragon made entirely of office supplies? That one's pretty fun. The look of pure, unadulterated horror on Vorthak's scaled face was absolutely priceless. What happened next was something I'd never seen before, and honestly something I don't think anyone at the Galactic Institute for Psychic Sciences had ever witnessed either. Vorthak the Mind Hunter, terror of telepaths, nightmare of the psychically gifted, apex predator of consciousness itself, began to have what I can only describe as the galaxy's first recorded case of psychic shell shock. It started with his hand. The one that had been pressed against my forehead with such confident malice just minutes earlier was now shaking like a chihuahua in a thunderstorm. His golden eyes, which had been focused with predatory intensity, were now darting around the room like he was seeing threats that weren't there. "The song," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It won't stop. Do. Why won't it stop?" Professor Mindak's tentacles were writhing in what I was beginning to recognize as extreme agitation. The fungus students had stopped glowing entirely, and the sentient gas cloud had actually condensed into a tight ball and was trying to hide behind a desk. But Vorthak wasn't done yet. Oh no. See, when you're a psychic predator who's built your entire identity around being the scariest thing in the mental landscape, and you suddenly find yourself trapped in a maze made of pop culture references and random grocery lists, your brain does this fun thing where it tries to process the experience and ends up making it worse. "The zombies were polite," he muttered, his claws scraping against the desk as his hands continued to shake. "They said please. They said thank you. They apologized for eating brains. That's not how zombies work. That's not how any of this works." I felt kind of bad for the guy, honestly. It's one thing to scare someone on purpose. It's another thing entirely to accidentally break their brain by showing them your weird dreams. But here's the thing about humans that I don't think the galaxy really understood yet. We don't just survive chaos, we thrive in it. We've evolved to function in a universe that doesn't make sense, where nothing follows the rules, and where the only constant is that everything changes. Vorthak, on the other hand, was a creature designed for order. His psychic abilities worked by finding patterns in consciousness, exploiting weaknesses in mental architecture, using fear and trauma as surgical tools to dismantle his victims' psychological defenses. What he'd found in my head wasn't architecture at all. It was more like a psychological Salvador Dali painting that had been put through a blender and then reassembled by someone who'd never seen the original. "The math teacher was also a robot," he continued, his voice getting higher. "But the robots were polite, too. Everything in your head is wrong, but also polite. How do you function? How do any of you function?" That's when the other students started to notice something really interesting. Vorthak wasn't just having a breakdown. He was having a very human-style breakdown. The careful, controlled way he usually spoke was replaced by the kind of stream of consciousness, rambling, that I recognized from my own 3 a.m. existential crises. "I tried to find your deepest fear," he said, his golden eyes focusing on me with something that looked less like predatory intent and more like desperate confusion. "I found you being afraid of the heat death of the universe, but then you just accepted it? You made peace with the fundamental horror of existence itself? That's not normal. That's not how minds are supposed to work." "Well," I said, offering him a Cheeto because he looked like he needed comfort food. "Humans have been dealing with existential dread for thousands of years. We've gotten pretty good at it. Want to talk about it? I find talking helps." The entire classroom went dead silent. I'd just offered therapy to the galaxy's most feared psychic predator, and he was actually considering it. "Your dreams," he whispered, taking the Cheeto with a trembling claw. "They're nightmares, but you enjoy them. Your trauma is comedy material. Your fears are entertainment. Your random thoughts connect to other random thoughts in patterns that shouldn't exist but somehow create meaning. It's like your entire species evolved to weaponize chaos." And that's when I realized what had actually happened here. Vorthak hadn't just invaded my mind. Through our psychic connection, I'd accidentally invaded his. My chaotic, illogical, beautifully random human thought patterns had infected his orderly reptilian consciousness, and his brain was desperately trying to process information it was never designed to handle. "I can't get the song out of my head," he said plaintively. "Baby shark do, 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 do. It's been 17 minutes and it's still playing. How do you live like this?" "Practice," I said. "Lots and lots of practice, and sometimes you just have to embrace the absurdity." That's when Creeks, who had been watching this entire exchange with growing amazement, started laughing. Not the polite chittering I was used to, but full-blown, hysterical laughter that had his forearms flailing and his compound eyes tearing up. "You broke him," Creeks gasped between fits of laughter. "You actually broke Vorthak the Mind Hunter with your completely unorganized thoughts and your weird human dreams, and that terrible children's song." The other students were starting to laugh too. Nervous at first, then with growing confidence as they realized that their tormentor was currently having an existential crisis over whether hot dogs were sandwiches. Vorthak looked around the room, seeing his carefully constructed reign of terror crumbling as his former victims laughed at him. But instead of rage, instead of the cold fury that everyone expected, he just looked tired. I don't understand, he said quietly. I've studied consciousness for decades. I know how minds work. I know how to break them, how to rebuild them, how to twist them into whatever shape I desire. But your mind, Marcus Webb, isn't shaped like anything at all. It's just chaos. Beautiful, terrifying, impossible chaos. And then something happened that I absolutely did not expect. Vorthak the Mindhunter, terror of telepaths, nightmare of the psychically gifted, looked at me with something that might have been respect. Teach me, he said. Now, I'd like to say that I handled this moment with grace and wisdom, maybe delivered some profound speech about the nature of consciousness and the beauty of chaos. What I actually did was stare at the 7-foot death lizard who had just asked me to be his life coach and said, teach you what exactly? How to think like you, Vorthak said, his voice carrying a desperate edge that made several students lean forward in fascination. How to exist in a state of controlled chaos. How to process trauma as humor, fear as entertainment, existential dread as just another Tuesday. How to be so fundamentally, beautifully broken that nothing can break you further. Professor Mindak's tentacles had gone completely still, which I was learning was the cephalopod equivalent of dropping your jaw. The entire classroom was watching this exchange like it was the season finale of their favorite show, which, let's be honest, it kind of was. I said slowly, I'm not sure it's something you can really teach. It's more like something that just happens to you over the course of, being human for a while. But Vorthak was already pulling out what looked like a holographic notepad, his claws moving with frantic precision. Explain the sandwich classification system. Is a hot dog a sandwich? What about a taco? What about soup in a bread bowl? I need to understand the logic. That's the thing, I said, beginning to realize that I was probably about to become the galaxy's first professor of applied human nonsense. There isn't any logic. That's the whole point. We argue about these things because the arguing is fun, not because there's actually a right answer. Vorthak's golden eyes widened like I'd just revealed the secrets of the universe, which, in a way, I guess I had. You create intellectual conflict for entertainment purposes? You engage in philosophical debates that have no resolution because the process itself is enjoyable? Well, yeah. Haven't you ever had a pointless argument just because it was fun? The look on his face suggested that no, he had not, and that this concept was as alien to him as telepathy was to me. Over the next few days, something unprecedented happened at the Galactic Institute for Psychic Sciences. Word spread about what had occurred in Professor Mintak's class, but not in the way these things usually spread. Instead of whispered warnings about avoiding the scary human, students were actively seeking me out, wanting to understand how I defeated the legendary Mindhunter with nothing but my own thoughts. Preeks became my unofficial translator, explaining to curious aliens that humans didn't actually have any special powers. It's more like they're immune to conventional psychic attacks, because their minds are already so chaotic that additional chaos doesn't register as an attack, he would say, which wasn't entirely accurate, but wasn't entirely wrong either. Meanwhile, Vorthak had appointed himself my personal student, following me around campus with the dedication of a religious convert. He'd started a journal where he documented what he called lessons in illogical thought processing, filling page after page with observations like, humans can hold contradictory beliefs simultaneously without experiencing cognitive dissonance, and Marcus spent 47 minutes debating whether cereal is soup, seemed to enjoy having no conclusion. I don't understand how you do it, he said one afternoon as we sat in the campus cafe, where I was introducing him to the concept of comfort food. He'd become fascinated by the idea that humans eat specific foods not for nutritional value but for emotional regulation. Yesterday you received news that your home planet's economy was experiencing minor fluctuations. Instead of calculating the statistical impact on your personal finances, you just said, it'll probably work out, and continued watching videos of small Earth creatures doing amusing things. Cat videos are important for mental health, I explained, showing him a compilation of kittens falling asleep in increasingly improbable positions. See, that one fell asleep standing up. How is that not the best thing you've seen all day? Vorthak studied the screen with the intensity he used to reserve for psychological warfare. The small predator has lost consciousness in a position that offers no tactical advantage and leaves it vulnerable to attack. Yet you find this soothing? Exactly. It's called cute. It's like a mental reset button. He made a note in his journal. Humans use images of vulnerable small animals to regulate emotional states. Query. Is this a form of psychological warfare against themselves? But the real change came when other students started approaching me for advice. It turned out that psychic societies, for all their mental powers, had never really developed healthy coping mechanisms for stress, fear, or uncertainty. They'd always been able to simply restructure their thoughts or manipulate their emotions directly. The idea that you could just accept that sometimes your brain was going to be a mess and that was okay was revolutionary. I keep having intrusive thoughts about my upcoming exams, a crystalline student named Zeph confided in me one day. In my species, such mental disorganization is considered a serious disorder. Intrusive thoughts are totally normal, I assured them. The trick is not to fight them, just acknowledge them and let them pass. Like, oh hey, there's my brain being weird again, thanks brain, but I'm busy right now. You talk to your own consciousness as if it were a separate entity? All the time. Sometimes I argue with myself, sometimes I win. Zeph's crystal structure actually flickered with what I was learning to recognize as amazement. Within a month, something incredible had happened. The social hierarchy that had dominated the Institute for decades was completely reshuffled. Vorthak, who had ruled through fear and intimidation, was now the galaxy's most enthusiastic student of human psychological resilience. Students who had spent years cowering in corners were now approaching me for lessons in what I'd started calling therapeutic chaos theory. The Mindhunters found themselves completely unable to intimidate anyone who'd spent time learning human-style thinking. Turns out, when you've already accepted that your brain is a beautiful disaster and that existence is fundamentally absurd, traditional psychological attacks just bounce right off. I tried to weaponize Zeph's fear of academic failure, one frustrated Mindhunter complained to Vorthak. But they just said, yeah, I might fail, but that's okay because failure is a learning experience. And also, I saw a really funny meme this morning, so my day is already a success. Vorthak nodded sagely, making notes. Yes, humans have taught us that it's possible to achieve psychological invulnerability through the strategic acceptance of vulnerability. It's the most elegant defense mechanism I've ever encountered. As for me, well, I'd gone from being the psychically deaf weakling that everyone expected to wash out in a week to being the accidental professor of a brand new field of study. Students were signing up for my unofficial seminars on advanced cognitive disorder management and introduction to productive overthinking. Professor Mindak had even approached me about developing a formal curriculum, though they'd had to admit they had no idea how to grade assignments in a class where the goal was to think less logically. Perhaps, Professor Mindak suggested, tentacles waving thoughtfully, we could evaluate students based on their ability to maintain emotional stability while contemplating paradoxes. Or we could just give everyone participation trophies, I suggested. Humans love those. And Vorthak, my former would-be tormentor and current most dedicated pupil, had discovered something that I don't think anyone expected. He was actually happier living with a little chaos in his life. Sure, he still had Baby Shark stuck in his head most days, and yes, he'd started ending conversations by wondering whether hot dogs were sandwiches, but he'd also stopped having the stress-induced molting that had apparently been a problem for years. I spent so long trying to impose order on consciousness, he told me one evening, as we watched the sunset through the Institute's crystal windows. I thought control was the same thing as strength. But you've shown me that there's power in accepting that some things can't be controlled, can't be organized, can't be made to make sense. Plus, I added, life's a lot more fun when you don't take it too seriously. Vorthak nodded, then paused. Marcus, I've been meaning to ask, in your taxonomy of food classifications, where would you categorize a wrap? I grinned. The student had become the master, and the master had learned that sometimes the best lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. Well, Vorthak, that's a great question. Let me tell you about the great rap debate of 2019. And somewhere in the cosmos, the universe itself seemed to chuckle at the beautiful absurdity of it all.